Well,
Okay.
just wait. I've got more negative numbers. I'd like to just point to, we talked a little bit about leadership, and I'm not sure then what happens when they do come to Washington, or is it, someone who, it's the people that end up there. But the public does not have a lot of confidence in our leaders right now. President Obama, we have him at the low point of 42% approval rating. And when you look at Congress, congressional GOP, 22%, and congressional Dems at 33%. So certainly, perhaps what we can do is start with Obama. Since, the past year has not been his best since his reelection. He's had one thing after another. I mean, if it's NSA, it's Benghazi, it's Obamacare, which I think we're going to hear a lot more about in the next few months. And also, now we have Putin, Ukraine. Can he get back on track? Can he reclaim the initiative this year?
No.
Okay, next question.
No, I mean, when he walked off the grandstand from the second inaugural, they might have just handed him the lame duck membership card, because he is the lamest of lame ducks. He can't, obviously
Why is that?
Can't get anything through this Congress. Probably couldn't get anything through even if the Democrats had a slender majority in the House. He has no control over foreign policy, as the Ukraine thing is showing. Usually, the refuge of a second-term president is to go overseas, and the world is proving resistant to his charms at a minimum. And his ability to influence is zero overseas.
I would argue that if you want to talk about getting the drop the mic moment, and then when it all ended in terms of the ability for the president to work with Congress, was the health care bill. I mean, to push through such a major piece of legislation on a party line vote sowed the seeds of discontent, and those are not going away. They've sprouted up, obviously, with the Tea Party, and it keeps going. So he was able to push through a pretty impressive piece of legislation, but it came at the cost of, again, when you talk about leadership moments, this is where you decide, I'm going all in, even though it means I could torch my relationships with the Congress for the rest of my tenure, or I could maybe pull back, try to find a bipartisan solution, and then go forward. He chose to do the scorched earth, then it's coming back.
But we can also thank one of the constitutional amendments on the fact that the second-term president is a lame duck, because the moment, as Steve mentioned, from that second inaugural, everyone knew that his time in office was going to have an expiration date attached to it. And so all of a sudden, people in your party who might be angling for the next presidential election, you automatically don't have as much discipline with people on your end of things. And so I think that really, you look back at George W. Bush's second term. You look at Bill Clinton's second term. You have to go all the way back to Ronald Reagan in 1986 for a major thing of bipartisan agreement. And that was actually on tax reform, in which, in some ways, in the debates they were having, it's easier to be in favor of tax reform than some of the other things like President Obama is trying to do with immigration. So I do think that term limits on a presidency do kind of stack the deck against somebody like that. The other thing is that there is a what have you done for me lately type of situation. And it is amazing for us where I think people just asked political journalists a year ago, well, the conversation was, Democrats are in ascendancy. Boy, they're going to win presidential contests for here on in because of the demographics. Gosh, they might even be able to take the House of Representatives back. Flash forward to what we're talking about now. Boy, Democrats are in trouble. They're not looking really good in the midterm elections. And it's very possible that environment will last through November. But then 2015 will give us something completely different to talk about. And it's one of the reasons why being a political reporter and a journalist is so fascinating, because the storylines do change all the time. Sometimes they do stay stagnant for 6 months or 8 months. But who's on top can certainly go down. And then you can, every politician also can have a political resurrection as well.
Or to make a vague attempt at defending journalism, what I think is really going on is that the long-term trends actually do still favor Democrats, and substantially, the demographic trends particularly, but in the short run, things look really grim, and Obama's mishandling has contributed to, although it's not the only explanation for this.
Two quick questions. First, it's a little early to write the history book, but how, from your
That wouldn't stop us. That
No,
would-
no, that's why I'm asking. How does your perspective and the contact you've had with Obama, how close is our public view of him to the private Obama, or the Obama you guys have seen when the lights aren't on, the cameras aren't on, or whatever?
The public perception is fed by our reporting of the last 4 years, and so I trust our reporting. I trust my reporting. You can trust my reporting. I mean, he is not a Bill Clinton, George W. Bush kind of character in private either. Although he's warm, he's gracious. But you know, when you were in a room with Bill Clinton or George W. Bush, you instantly knew why they were successful at politics, because they would have met everyone in this room. They were a little more at ease with that part of the job. But Barack Obama is friendly.
I think when Barack Obama's Bob Caro actually gets to work on him, the question that he'll have to wrestle with is whether he even liked the work. And that's a bit of a puzzle. Is, you know,
Whether he liked
he
it.
wanted the job, but I'm not sure he likes the work.
Well, the campaigns have been very different than the governing. Let's turn to Congress and the Republicans and talk a little bit about the rift between the Tea Party and the establishment Republicans. And, you know, is that going to come together more in the next year or so, or is that still part of what DC politics is all about today?
Oh, the debate is still ongoing, and we're going to find out in primaries across the country, particularly in Senate races, on whether if some Senate Republicans, some big well-known names like Lindsey Graham in South Carolina, can they hold on to their jobs? And it's very possible that all 7 or 8 of them survive. It's possible that 2 or 3 don't. And one thing that really, I think, could set off some alarm bells were the recent primaries in Texas. And of course, some of the more establishment figures like John Cornyn came out ahead unscathed. The establishment candidate who's running for governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, had no problems whatsoever. But when you look at some of the results, and John Cornyn ended up having 41% of all Texas Republicans vote against him. Even though he'd really never made a fireable offense, he'd never voted for any of President Obama's initiatives, didn't try to approve any of his Supreme Court justices, and still 41% of the Texas electorate said, we wanted somebody else. We think he's in Washington, he's everything that has to do something wrong. So that energy is there, and it becomes up to candidates to be able to challenge it. I mean, if you really want to know why Republicans have no incentive to work with the White House, it's because the Republican base doesn't really want them to.
Right.
You would be risking your job to say, hey, you know what, I think immigration reform is a good idea. That's the reason why it's languishing on Capitol Hill. And Lindsey Graham just happens to be one of the architects of that gang of 8 immigration legislation. And I guarantee you that all 4 Republican opponents who are trying to defeat him will use that against him. And so right now, there's all the incentive not to be able to work with the other party, and the entire lecture was kind of predicated on, you know, can 2014 or 2016 fix what's, you know, wrong with Washington? Well, sometimes actually fixing what's wrong with Washington is having one party control. It's a whole lot easier when you're a whole party, you don't have divided government. When you do have divided government and you're asking somebody from an opposition party to say, hey, why don't you support the other team? It's really hard, and all the incentives are against that.
Yeah,
Well, I mean,
so while we're there, though, we really can't talk about President Obama and the Congress without talking about 2014. And don't jump on me. Florida
I don't
13
know about
has
Change that.
changed some of these numbers. We now see that there are 3 vacancies, and you're looking at 233 Republicans. But one of the things here that I think is significant is that when we look at, you know, history actually seems to be against the current president in terms of gaining any other seats in the House. Since World War II, only Bill Clinton has picked up seats in the midterm election in a second term. And so if some of you are seeing that there are a couple of presidents missing there, they were one-term presidents. And Clinton obviously just picked up a handful. So I would like you guys to talk about what you expect to be happening this year.
On the House side.
On the House side.
Then we'll turn to the Senate.
Yeah, I mean, to the points that were made on either side of me about the battle for the Republican Party, it is a national debate versus the party's divided, Tea Party, non-Tea Party, but it really is a debate between the national Republicans and the congressional Republicans. That number is not going to change all that much, especially on the Democratic side, because thanks in part to redistricting and some other things we could talk about, that it's locked in. The cake is baked for Republicans until the next round of redistricting.
Maybe you can just briefly just
talk
a
about
little
how
bit.
that works.
Yeah.
And here's part of the problem, and here's where the demographics become even more problematic for Republicans. When they have the debate about immigration, you say, didn't they watch the 2012 election? Don't they see where the future is? It's not with rural, white, older voters, right? Our future is much more diverse. When you look at the average congressional district, which many of them were drawn by Republicans, they're 75% white. Right? The average Republican district, 75% white. The average Democratic district is 51% white. To make a Republican district safe, which is what Republicans did when they drew these new lines, they took all of the minorities and pushed them out of their districts. It made for a safe seat. It made for a clueless member of Congress, right? Because they have absolutely no idea what is going on nationally because their district doesn't reflect that at all. So to say to them, well, we need immigration reform is an important issue, it's not something that is obviously front and center to them. What I think we learned from Florida 13 the other night, and I think when we see these national numbers that you put up about the president's approval rating, there's no doubt that this is going to be another down arrow year for the party, the 6-year itch, as it's called. It could be as many as 10 seats, maybe 12 that Democrats lose. The good news for Democrats, if you can call this good news, is after losing 63 seats in 2010, and then thanks to redistricting, there aren't many seats left to lose, all right? So that's the good news. You can't lose 63. I mean, it's kind of impossible. So, 5 to 10 seat gain for Republicans is probably the right
What
range.
issues do you guys see as being front and center in terms of the economy versus the cultural battles that are going on between the two parties for the midterm elections?
So Democrats want to make it about the economy and the economic argument that Obama made last time, right? We're going from the middle out. We're looking out for the middle class. Republicans are looking out for rich people. Republicans want to make it about Obamacare. The end. That's the debate.
But one of the things about issues is you just don't always know. I mean, there's some times where we think we have the electorate and the issue terrain all mapped out. I just remember the 2008 presidential contest, and every political reporter, every observer was like, this is going to be about foreign policy. We're still talking about the Iraq War. We're still talking about the residue after 9/11. And then smack dab, we're talking about the economy the last 3 months of that race. And really, we've been talking about the economy ever since. And at some point, it's going to change. We just don't know when that's going to be. Probably not some October surprise in this election, but it kind of going back again to all the vicissitudes in American politics, things always change, and it makes for fascinating discussions and coverage. But I always try to remind ourselves that when we're mapping out what stories we're going to cover for NBC News or what things I want to be able to write about, we could be talking about something completely different come September, October.
What's your sense of this issues?
I think clearly healthcare is the short-term issue in 2014, probably well into 16. And the Democrats obviously trying this mend it, don't end it approach. We were just out in Southern California, the Valley, looking at some of the swing districts where they're doing the same argument that Alex Sink used in Florida, kind of trying to inch away from Obamacare. But I think the most fascinating issue in the country is the question of gay marriage. I don't think there's been a faster change in public opinion in my lifetime. And it is taking hold so fast in states like Virginia, where I live, and it's going to cause a heck of a question within the Republican Party and its coalition, where a lot of the professional politicians see what's happening with the change here, that it's happening so fast with young people, with popular culture, and then their base, which is clearly supportive of traditional marriage. We just look at Utah. Utah, probably one of the most socially conservative states. It's 47-47 now.
I do find myself wondering how Lee Atwater would feel about a wedge social issue splitting the Republican Party.
Well, they don't know what to do with it, and it's just fascinating. It's done without political leadership. None of this came from any, this is all from the people.
Yep.
I mean, just 2004, we had the Democratic nominee for president officially opposing gay marriage while going to a gay wedding. You could say he was actually for it while against it. and Barack Obama wasn't until he got influenced, by his words, but from his own family. So the leadership it's just percolating, and it's so fast. I just think it's going to dominate
Scott
our
Brown,
politics.
who was talking about running in New Hampshire for the Senate, obviously a Massachusetts senator, said the other day, he said, I can't believe how Democrats are using this gay marriage as a wedge to divide our party. Yeah. Oh, huh.
But it's
How
not
things
just,
have
it's
changed.
just not gay marriage, it's also marijuana legalization.
Yeah.
I mean, what has been fascinating, and you kind of look at the millennial generation, and so much has been made, but their attitudes about things, people who are 18 to 34, is radically different than attitudes that we've had previously from folks. And, there's so much social change that's happening right now in this country that, yeah, of course, I think social issues are going to be something, and Democrats for the first time 10 years ago, they were fighting on all social issues. Like, well, we don't want to get trapped on gay marriage. We don't want to get trapped on abortion. And now Democrats feel like, well, when we're talking about contraception, boy, this is an issue that we can use against Republicans.
Right.
We want to be able to talk about abortion. And so it's been a fascinating development.
Well, the congressional districts may be more homogeneous, so maybe we'll move to the Senate. And as everyone knows, for the Senate, the Democrats, of course, are currently in the majority, but they need to defend 21 seats compared to the 15 for the Republicans. And on board, there's more exposure for the Democrats. As you can see, the map seems tilted more towards the Republicans. So I'd like you to just open up and what you think the chances are for the GOP to gain the 6 seats and reclaim the majority. I mean, they've had a couple of opportunities the last couple of cycles, which they've
So what
squandered.
states you guys going to be watching?
Well, I think it'll come down to Louisiana. I think it'll be a draw. I'm hoping a special election. I've spent
Can
December.
you talk a little bit about the Louisiana?
Yeah, Louisiana's. We think New York is like no place like it. Louisiana has very different elections. So,
Yeah, I mean, if you don't win the majority, it goes to a 2-candidate runoff. And I've been fortunate enough
so
to spend a
November,
few
the
elections.
general election's actually a primary in essence.
And
it
then
gets
up in
just like-
December, and we would all have to go down to New Orleans to cover it. It would be terrible. It would be
And I
terrible.
believe the SEC championship game is also, and so if like LSU is somehow in that game, how that might impact turnout. This is something that Republican strategists are already starting to kind of talk about.
This is our bias.
Yeah, talk about the media
It's a
bias.
food
right
bias.
Here. Yes.
But I do think it could come down
and
to
sports.
Louisiana. I think it'll be very close. I think they're going to lose South Dakota. They're going to Montana maybe. North Carolina, Kay Hagan, I think, is in trouble. West Virginia in trouble. I think Louisiana could decide it.
I think if you look at that map right now, you can put pretty much 4 seats in the Democratic column. I'm sorry, in the Republican column right now. The 3 open seats in very, very red states, Montana, South Dakota, West Virginia, I think Arkansas. I would be surprised if Mark Pryor pulls that out. So now you say you need 2 more states. And it's not just that they have 21 seats to defend, but of those, Romney carried 7, and he carried 6 of those 7 by double digits. And there was just a poll. I mean, everybody's been saying for a while that Louisiana that's the closest race, and it's, but there's recent polling out this week from Harrison Hickman that actually showed her behind. And the real issue is where the president's approval rating is, right? So if you think the president's number in your national poll is at 42, then where is he in Louisiana, Alaska, North Carolina, even Colorado and Iowa? So if his number is at 42 nationally, he's really struggling in Louisiana. We saw in those polls this week that where the Democrats hit was basically President Obama's approval rating. Yeah. And that means, to me, the Senate control could come down to Colorado and Iowa and Kentucky, like these strange places where if you could see Democrats losing their most obvious and most vulnerables, but could they make it up by winning in Kentucky? Or could Republicans, find a way to even get more than 6 seats by picking up Colorado
And you
Iowa?
anticipate the Democrats in those states, those red states, will be running away from Obama, and does that ever really work?
No, it never works. You can't run away from, we learned this in Florida. Alex Sink wasn't in Congress when Obamacare passed. It doesn't matter if you voted for it, you didn't vote for it, you were a Democrat, it is attached to you. You have to find a way to proactively deal with this.
Well, to Amy's point, I'm almost kind of looking at a lot of the Senate races in two different tiers. And the first are those red southern states we're talking about, and Republicans, if they run the table, they're going to get the Senate back. And that's a very good night for them. But then they can have a great night getting into the Colorados all of a sudden if they are able to end up somehow making Minnesota competitive. Somehow, same thing with Oregon, Michigan. And that Republicans being able to pick off a couple of those seats turns a good night into a great night. And I think in political reporters, we want to tell you like election night matters, the battle for the Senate matters. I'm going to throw a little water on that. Yes, it matters for who's going to be the next committee chairman in 2015. But if Republicans run the table in all the red states, they're going to have a 51-person majority. And then what's going to happen is that President Obama is just going to spend all of his 2015 and 2016 vetoing everything that comes out of a Republican House and a Republican Senate. And then 2016, while Republicans have a fantastic map this time around, 2016, we're going to be looking at a Republican senator up for re-election in Illinois, in Florida, all of these blue and purple states, New Hampshire, and that Democrats have I would think, a very easy time getting the Senate back come 2016.
Actually, the number on that is the Republicans are going to be defending 24 states in 2016, Democrats only 10. So these numbers are more than flipped in terms at least of what they're defending.
But if Republicans have a great night and they are able to go into the Colorados and the Michigans and New Hampshire, if Scott Brown ends up running, then they make 2016 a bigger feat for Democrats to wrest things back. And so to me, and also those kind of states, it tells me more about 2016 and talking about a lot of the demographic change. Hey, can a Republican candidate do better in Colorado? Can they do well in Michigan? They haven't had any success. And so to me, that would actually almost kind of make a lot of people rethink 2016, even with Hillary Clinton if she decides to run, because those are in states in which President Obama already didn't lose in the previous presidential election when he was up really high in Arkansas and Louisiana.